Hey everybody, it's the last Sunday of our Easter season, Pentecost. 50 days after Easter. I don't know if it quick for you, long for you. Well, most of us by this time were already making summer plans, many perhaps gone up north, just a different feeling. That's why I always not feel sorry, but Pentecost doesn't get the prominence that it really deserves, that it earns. It's really one of the great feasts of the church year, but it actually comes in the wrong time. Here we are at the middle of May, and sometimes depending on what Easter is, it's June, and everything is hot and summer and vacation. So we don't really give it the significance. But without Pentecost, that's the beginning of what we call the birthday of the church. And what all the apostles had going for them, being with Jesus 3 years, witnessing his resurrection, having the Last Supper, seeing him ascend to heaven, you would think that's all it would have taken to go out and be bold and proclaim the good news, but no. Now, of course, maybe they were told to go and wait for the Holy Spirit, but I don't think they minded going up and waiting, not having to, go out and face the crowds. Who knows what would have happened? But when the Holy Spirit came, then the church began. And in my mind, just keep this in mind as well. The years, we estimate the year to be 33 AD, 33. And so not that far from now, at 9 years or so, 9 years be to 2033, but 2,000 years old of the church. Hope somehow we all Christians celebrate it somehow, some fashion, the 2,000th anniversary of the birth of our church. And God willing, I hope to be around for that, and hopefully many of you as well, to celebrate 2,000 years. So we read from the Acts of the Apostles, which is chapter 2. When the time for Pentecost was fulfilled, they were all in one place together. Suddenly there came from the sky a noise like a strong driving wind, and it filled the entire house in which they were. Then there appeared to them tongues as of fire, which parted and came to rest on each one of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, began to speak in different tongues as the Spirit enabled them to proclaim. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven staying in Jerusalem. At the sound they gathered in a large crowd, but they were confused because each one heard them speaking in his own language. They were astounded. Amazement asked, "Are not all these people who were speaking Galileans? Then how does each of us hear them in his native language? We are Parthians, Medes, Emilites, inhabitants of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, and the district of Libya near Cyrene, as well as travelers from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism, Cretans and Arabs. Yet we hear them speaking in our own tongues of the mighty acts of God." So there you have it. There's the account of what we celebrate today, Pentecost Sunday. Now, there are 3 great Jewish festivals which every male Jew living within, say, 20 miles of Jerusalem was legally bound to come. So if you were 20 miles from the city, these 3 festivals, you were expected to be there to celebrate. Passover, Pentecost, and then this Feast of the Tabernacles. Pentecost means 50th. And another name for Pentecost was Feast of Weeks. It was so called because it fell on the 50th day, a week of weeks, after Passover. The Passover fell in the middle of April. Therefore, Pentecost fell at the beginning of June. And by that time, traveling conditions were at their best, at least as many came to the Feast of Pentecost as came to the Passover. So that was a big draw because the weather was nice, suitable to traveling. So you had just as many, if not more, coming to the Pentecost Feast of the Weeks, as they did for Passover. Now that explains why all of a sudden have this roll of countries mentioned in this chapter. Nevertheless, there was a more international crowd in Jerusalem than at the time of Pentecost. The feast had 2 main significance. It had historical significance. It commemorated the giving of the law to Moses on Mount Sinai. It also had an agricultural significance. At the Passover, the crop's first omer of barley was offered to God, and at Pentecost, 2 loaves were offered in gratitude for the ingathered harvest. And one other unique characteristic, the law laid it down that on that day, no servile work should be done. So it was a holiday for all, and the crowds on the streets would be greater than ever. My gosh, huh? It's like going to a park on a holiday, Memorial Day coming up, or the beach on those nice days. Of course, be more people. No work, and that's where people gathered. Now, this was an important passage because it's a description of Pentecost itself and the descent of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles. They all gathered in one place. Suddenly they came, but we heard the sound of a mighty wind. So it wasn't a wind, nothing was being ruffled about, tossed about, just the sound of the wind. And there appeared to them tongues as of fire, resting on each of them. And they all, filled with the Spirit, began to speak in tongues, and they were able to understand. Wow. Whew. And so the first verse, the day of Pentecost had come. In order to understand everything that is happening right here, you have to know what that means when the day of Pentecost had come. So break it down. The first point was the Pentecost. Greek word, we mentioned 50th, Passover, we have that done there. And the tongues of fire, and we have the wind, but now we have the tongues of fire. Why tongues of fire? Most of us can, at a simple level, think that it was because they began to speak in tongues and the Holy Spirit was like a flame, a fire equipping them to do that. And that's true. But from a Jewish perspective, there's more going on here than exactly tied to the festival of weeks. You go back to books of Exodus, chapter 19, you actually look at the biblical account of when Moses received the law, the Ten Commandments, you're going to notice something significant. So let's look at the 1 second there in 19, verse 16, 18. It says this, on the morning of the third day, there was thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mountain, a very loud trumpet blast. So all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. And Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord descended upon it in fire. All right? So the Jewish people, and that's what they would link it with. And this goes on how narrate the fire. God speaks, and Moses goes and receives the law, the Ten Commandments. He receives the Torah, the Decalogue, means 10 Commandments, 10. Now, in the Old Testament of Mount Sinai, the Lord descends upon the Israelites, which are the 12 tribes. In the New Covenant we have right now, the Holy Spirit descends upon the apostles, the first Christians, in tongues of fire, as if it is the new Mount Sinai in essence. Now, one thing to clarify is speaking in tongues. What Christians today, especially the Pentecostal, not so much speaking in different languages that are known, but typically it's what we call, would sound like a gibberish, right? And Paul speaks about that in Corinthians, that actually he prefers that they wouldn't speak that in the gathering because no one could understand unless someone could interpret it. But perhaps you've been some places, and there have been churches I have, and actually spoken tongues, maybe prayed over. And that is what Paul said, when the groan's too deep that you cannot express in words, we express in the tongues, all right, and the sounds. Because really our greatest emotions, think about it, the greatest emotion when you're scared, when you're shocked, you fear, you don't speak. You scream, right? You yell. You don't say, it's something about that. So that's sort of what's so deep that you can't express it in words, that it's just a sound. You let go. You leave from your rational part and just let go, let it flow deep in the spirit. Now, there's some Pentecostal says, unless you speak in tongues, you don't have the Holy Spirit. No, we would not say that. Some receive it. It's not the most important gift anyway. The gift of love is what we should aspire for. But the main thing about this feast, all right, Pentecost, is the birth of the church. And now it's not simply for the Jews in Jerusalem, but it's for the worldwide. It's for all peoples. And so when the church does speak in tongues, does speak in many languages, it may not be by one individual, but it's all across the land. All the people speak, all the language they are, the gospel is proclaimed in that tongue. So I want to wish you already a happy Pentecost. Be open to the Holy Spirit. Let your life be led by the Holy Spirit. Be guided by the Holy Spirit. Seek the wisdom of the Holy Spirit. And be inspired by the Holy Spirit. God bless you. Happy birthday to our church.